See, this is good because it shows how easy it is to miss the obvious. Because we're missing the obvious all day long, aren't we? Yeah. So it must be pretty easy to miss the obvious because we're good at it. We're doing it without trying, right? Yeah. So the answer to the question was, when I asked you, where did you get that from? It was a thought. But without thinking. If you say to me that you did the Harding's experiment and you did the pointing experiment and you looked and you said, when I looked here, I saw nothing. And I said to you, who saw nothing? Now, if you answer that question by telling me what you think, it'll be wrong. But there's a difference between thinking and noticing a thought, isn't there? That's not a difference you would necessarily notice because your default state is thinking. I am thinking, right? He doesn't have to notice that he's thinking because that's his default state. That's what he's doing all the time. So he doesn't have to notice that. But if I point it out, right, then he notices it, and he notices that he had no awareness of that before I pointed it out. That's how default it is. That's how much of a default state that is, okay? So yeah, and so to answer any question, there has to be a thought. It has to language first, right, for you to produce an answer, right? But the question is, are you looking where I asked you to look, right? Because I said who, right? Who sees nothing? Are you looking where I asked you to look? If you look where I asked you to look, and you give the answer that you see there when I ask you to look, you won't be thinking of the answer. The answer will appear in thinking.
That's a subtle difference.
It's the subtle difference that makes all the difference. To learn to be present to thought instead of the thinker of thought. And if you're present to thought, then thought can be useful because it will be the way what's being revealed gets identified. Instead of, see, the reality of it, the interesting thing of it is that if you look, if what you saw when you pointed was nothing, the question, if that was true, that you actually saw nothing, right? Then the question is, having seen that, do you interpret it or do you simply express what you see? If you say, when I pointed, I saw nothing, right? That's an interpretation. So then what actually happened? See, because when I say it's an interpretation, your mind added what it always adds, right? I looked and I saw nothing. Your mind added what it always adds, but you wouldn't notice it always adding it because it always adds it. And when it adds it, you don't notice it added it. So you wouldn't see it. If that's not true, if it's an interpretation, what's the truth? When you say, I pointed here and I saw nothing. And by the way, I understand that's common, that's common language to speak that way, right? But it's common language to misspeak. So then what are we dealing with here? What is the interpretation? But even when you think you're the one thinking about the answer, how do you know all that? See, the personality will do all kinds of side steps and shuffles and side streets and thought processes to stay away from the obvious, which is you never knew anything and will never know anything other than because awareness is aware of it. Well, the thing that doesn't work about it is once you identify yourself as the thinker of those thoughts, you're in that world. Right? It's just
but
like...
If I was aware, I'd be aware that that was maybe an appropriate thing to
No,
say.
but you are aware.
Well,
You are. You are. Not only are you aware. You are the awareness that's aware. That's what you are missing. When you point, if you say, "I see nothing," you better mean the awareness is aware of nothing. And if you do mean the awareness is aware of nothing, and I challenge the interpretation, you should be able to immediately say, yeah, I meant the awareness. Okay, if you meant the awareness, then we're on the same page. But that's not what happened. That's not what happened. You go right back into the thought process and start trying to do math. It's not using the senses, it's just aware of the senses. And when you wake up, when you're aware, when you're awake, you're aware of the senses. Because senses are the gateway to making contact with the world. So when you're awake and you're aware of the senses. When you're not awake and you're not aware of the senses, you're aware of the thought processes that's interpreting the information coming in from the senses. That's why one of the things that is really, I've been really paying attention to and noticing is the relationship we have with the physical body and the relevance of that in the practice of awareness, how important that is. Nitsushimi Roshi, one of the Brad Warner's, if you know who Brad Warner is, his Zen master, when he talked about meditation, he said, the meditation practice is a practice that we are using to balance the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. He was referring to the body. Saying when we're meditating and we're aware and we relax the body, the relaxation of the body and the letting go of the identification with the body and the focusing of awareness, as awareness, aware of the body, allows the body to begin to go into a natural state, allows the body to begin to let go. And when that happens, an imbalanced energy system starts to come into balance. What I mean by that is this energy system has been working overtime all along, right? Because it's living in a state of threat, right? It's constantly living in a state of experiencing anxiety, concern, and threat. So much so that it goes unseen, so much so that it's invisible, just like your breath is most of the time, just like your identity is all the time, almost all the time, if not all the time. Your identity being awareness itself, right? That's missed, that's overlooked, that's not recognized because of the preoccupation with thinking as a way of being. Thinking as a way of being, thinking as a way of existing, thinking as a way of knowing. When in truth, that's not so, it's an appearance. Thinking never knows anything. Thinking is a process. The knowing of everything is awareness, knows everything. It's awareness that knows. If I ask you how you know anything, the answer will always be the same answer, awareness. You will say, I am aware, right? But if you've been practicing these things and after you've been doing your homework, if you've been studying the teachings, eventually you'll begin to recognize that I am aware is an interpretation. Awareness is aware is the reality of it. So when you begin to interrupt the thought process and start removing that, see, in the thought process what happens, it continues to interject the person. That's why you said, I see nothing. When you said that, your brain interjected the personality into the process. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Sure.
Yeah. So what we're talking about is being awake. Being awake means that you would see that. If you don't see that, and I watched you, but if you don't see that, the only resource you have is thinking. So when I challenge what you were saying, when I challenge what he was saying, his eyes go up in his head and he starts doing math. I simply said, look at what's right here. And he goes, immediately the tendency is to start to figure, right? Start to figure, start to think, start to figure, right? You go right into that. It's automatic. It's mechanical. You go right into that, right? And when you go right into that, you miss what was there that didn't need to be thought about. It was just there. Awareness is just there. It doesn't need to be thought about. It doesn't need to be interpreted. So so when you're practicing meditation, I really want to emphasize how important it is to be aware of relaxing the body. We have no idea what it would even be like to feel a relaxed body, because most of us have never had that experience. You know, maybe before we started to get language and went nuts, when we were an infant, we may have had a relaxed body, but not since then. So now, if you really engage with that, so when you're practicing meditation, you really pay attention to really relaxing the body, really letting go, so the nervous system can come into balance. Yeah, and when that happens, it's like a tuning fork, right? When that happens, it's like then your consciousness aligns with itself instead of getting carried off into a thought process. And another aspect of this in relationship to the body is that as you go through this process, and as you become more aware of the reality of the body in terms of how much energy is stuck there and how much tension is in this body, right? Then it would be a natural response to that to pay attention not only to relaxing when you're practicing meditation, right? But practicing relaxation as an ongoing practice along with the ongoing practice of paying attention to the reality of yourself. Practicing relaxation as an ongoing process as you go through the day, to keep looking and seeing, how tight am I? How contracted am I? Like that type of thing. And then the other thing that would naturally come up and be a response would be, well, what other ways can I help this body, you know, to relax? And what other ways can I help this body to come into balance, right? And then you start to look at things like diet. If you're eating a lot of sugar, right, and you're eating a lot of carbohydrates, right, and your diet's imbalanced, or there's too much food going into the system and the system is working overtime to just process all that food, right, that's going to be against the balance. That's not going to facilitate the balance, right? So so it starts to become a natural thing to become aware of that and start to pay attention to that. You know, I noticed right now I'm doing what I would consider a recovery process from the pandemic, right? Meaning that I thought I was pregnant. You know, during the pandemic, a lot of us, we didn't have access to a lot of things that we were doing. We were isolated, right? And so the things that we had available to us to entertain ourselves and to comfort ourselves included all the wrong things to eat, right? And so given our tendency to be stupid and our tendency to seek pleasure, we gained weight over the last couple of years, right? So it's an opportunity to use that, to deal with that and to work with that, because it puts the body enough out of balance that it might get your attention, right? If you start getting too fat, it might get your attention. You start having more difficulty with exercising, or difficulty feeling a decent level of energy, right? So that's another aspect of this. But you see, I wouldn't say to you, oh, it's very important for you to pay attention to your body and to watch what you eat and to, you know, and to get enough exercise. I'm not saying it that way. I'm saying because it's just like a lot of people say, well, can I continue on the spiritual path if I don't change my diet? Can I continue on the spiritual path if I smoke pot? Can I continue on the spiritual path if I smoke cigarettes? Can I continue on the spiritual path if I drink? And the answer to all those questions is don't try and control those things. Don't try and control unless it's so crazy that you're killing yourself. You know, if you're shooting up heroin, I wouldn't say don't try and control that, right? But for most of it, it's not that bad. For most of us, we're on the slow kill. You know, we're doing just enough to keep ourselves unhealthy without directly killing ourselves, right? So in these practices and teachings, the guidance is don't try and change all that. That's just trying to be in control. No. Focus your attention on the realization of your true nature and the experience of being awake. As that occurs, and as that awakening occurs, it will be natural for your attention to go to taking care of the body and taking care of anything that's out of kilter. Anything that's out of kilter, whether it's your physical body, whether it's your relationships, whether it's your finances, all of that will start to come up and start to come into the process of integration, come into the process of recognition and realization of the realities involved, right? And it will be part of a natural process of being awake. It's a natural process of being awake, because when you're awake and you begin to no longer identify with the personality, right, the awareness that you are, right, will start to activate itself in terms of the way it's relating to your body, your diet, your exercise, your relationships, everything in your life. So that's why, the teachers have said to people that ask that question about whether it's smoking pot, cigarettes, food, or whatever the question is, don't necessarily worry about controlling the behavior, control who's doing it. Deal with who's doing it. And if that shifts, there'll be a natural interest and a natural process of starting to pay attention in a different way. And you'll find yourself doing things differently when it comes to exercise, diet, relationships, sleep, the whole 9 yards. Especially if you know yourself to be the awareness that's aware of that. Right. See? If you know yourself to be the personality that's aware of that, the personality's still involved, right? And then when it comes time to eat the sweets or the personality will be right there saying, oh, come on.
Yeah, personality.
Yeah, so if you get that personality straightened out and get it in its right place and identify with the awareness, these processes become very easy to do. Otherwise, they're very difficult to do because you're being the personality trying to change, and the personality doesn't want to stop eating.
Yeah. And our country encourages.
That's right. Yeah, and the people that are making the big bucks know the personality doesn't want to stop eating. And not only do they know it doesn't want to stop eating, but they know it wants things to be very easy. And so you don't have to cook too much, you don't have to do much to eat. And so we'll just give you all the ready-made prepared foods with the chemicals in that, and you'll eat that. All right, that's enough.